appreciate the task that you have at hand. Thank you. All right, now we have State Representative Mike Jacobs to talk about the legislation moving through the legislature at this moment about concerning schools. Go ahead.
Well, good evening, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, and I see a lot of familiar faces in this room, I'm Mike Jacobs. I'm the state representative for District 80, which is about 3/4 in the city of Brookhaven, 1/4 in the city of Sandy Springs, just across the line. And I represent most of the city of Brookhaven, a portion of Ashford Park and Drew Valley, or Representative Scott Holcomb's district. First of all, I want to thank I've almost said Commissioner Thurman. Wanted to thank Superintendent Thurman for stepping up to the challenge of the DeKalb County school system. I have found his interactions with the public to be very forthright and transparent, and I think it's been outstanding the level of communication there's been, first of all. And second of all, I have a high level of confidence with this new board and with Superintendent Thurman at the helm that they have a laser focus on what is the most important task at hand, which is restoring DeKalb County's accreditation status by the end of this year. That's a big task, and I am confident that you are equal to it. So I appreciate all the work you're doing in the school system. I do want to talk a little bit about the drama that was the the mayor's asked me to speak about school-related issues in the General Assembly, particularly HR 486, which is the city schools constitutional amendment proposal that's out there. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about some local legislation that affects the city, because we do have some of that going on as well, and it's something that I feel I ought to brief you on. But let's start first and foremost with the removal of the school board. That was something that the local legislators from DeKalb County were briefed throughout the process by the governor. And if you look at what Governor Deal has done, it is a very impressive thing. Because you go down that list of folks who were appointed to the school board, and they have phenomenal backgrounds and credentials, each and every one of them. And the thing that impressed me more about what he did is that if you ask the members of the local legislative delegation, very few of us know even one of them. Which, think about that for a second. The governor has selected highly qualified people who are insulated from the political process. And that should tell you that Governor Deal, in making his selections, was very focused on the end game goal of not having such a large school system lose its accreditation and the impact that would have both on our children in the classrooms, and I am a father of a Montgomery Elementary student, so I speak personally in that regard, but also what it would do to our property values, what it would do for economic development in DeKalb County. If we lose our accreditation status, if we ultimately lose accreditation, slip from being put on probation, it makes it difficult for our community, DeKalb County as a whole, the city of Brookhaven, to attract business to our area. It is very clear that we're on the right track with the superintendent and the school board that has been appointed, and I look forward to seeing their work pan out in a positive way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that I do want to take a little bit of issue with, because I've actually heard this from a fair number of constituents, that accreditation, and SACS in particular, is just about, it is about governance, and it is about things that adults are doing in the school system, and not so much about what's going on in the classroom. But it's important. And here's why it's important. I mean, it's easy to just say that and diminish it. Well, this is all about adults and it's not about the children. But if the school system loses accreditation, because too much money is being spent on legal fees, for example. And that was one of the knocks on the DeKalb school system in the Sachs report. That is money that is not reaching our children in the classroom. It affects our kids. It's governance issues that directly impact our children. Another knock was nepotism. Well, I mean, that goes to whether the folks who are running the school system are the highest and best folks to be doing that, to be running the school system. So yes, it is about governance and it is about things that adults are doing, but it has a very big impact on what reaches our children in the classroom. And so I don't think we should diminish the importance of working very hard to move our school system back up the chain in terms of regaining its footing with regard to accreditation. So with that said, there is a proposal that has been introduced by Representative Tom Taylor, House Resolution 486. As you may know, our state constitution says that after a certain date, there shall be no more independent school systems. That only, you know, and that's why the city of Decatur can have its own school system. They're grandfathered in, or the city of Marietta can have their own school system. They're grandfathered in. Representative Taylor has introduced, and I have co-signed, a constitutional amendment that would make it possible for new cities created on or after January 1st, 2005, so that's Sandy Springs forward, to either independently establish through local legislation. So it would take this is a constitutional amendment, so by passing the constitutional amendment, we would enable something to subsequently happen, and that would be have to occur through subsequent legislation, to either individually create city school systems again, if the city was created on or after January 1st, 2005, or to jointly form an independent school system with neighboring municipalities. And the neighboring municipalities are not necessarily any municipality that is adjacent to a city that was created after that date. So that means the city of Chamblee is included, okay? So it would be possible to jointly create a school system, say between, under this constitutional amendment, to jointly create a city schools, a cluster of cities, one city school system that involves a cluster of cities that could be, say, Dunwoody, Brookhaven, and Chamblee, and Doraville, and also could go across the line and include Sandy Springs, because the constitutional amendment that's been proposed says that it doesn't necessarily have to be within a single county. So that's on the table. Now, I will tell you that that is not an immediate term project, in the sense that I don't think the votes are there in the General Assembly today to pass it. But it's always possible that as time goes on, and as we discuss the issue, and as we educate our colleagues, that we will be able to build that support that is required to pass a constitutional amendment, keeping in mind that it does require 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate in order to pass it. One of the reasons that we limited it to cities created on or after January 1st, 2005 is that generally you would get some pushback on this kind of issue from folks who represent rural areas. And so in order to kind of obviate that kind of opposition, limiting it to a smaller group of cities, I think, made a lot of sense, and so that's why we have that date in the legislation. So that is pending. It is not something that is likely to pass in the current term, but it is something that we are going to continue to talk about and continue the conversation about with an eye to the future. I should also mention, as long as we're on the subject matter of local control, that you do presently have a very good option that is available to you, and I see former Senator Dan Weber is here, and Dan is the expert on this. I hope he doesn't start blushing because I called him that, but it's true. Dan, is a tremendous resource for this proposition because he was involved in creating it, and that is that you can form a charter school cluster. And in fact, the Druid Hills cluster the Druid Hills High School cluster is presently working to create a charter cluster. And it is something that, frankly, I think other high school clusters in DeKalb ought to be looking at. And it's something that I will encourage. I'm a resident of the Chamblee cluster. It's something that I will encourage the Chamblee cluster to take a look at. What it is the cluster, all of the schools within the cluster, so taking Chamblee as an example, Chamblee High and Chamblee Middle and Montgomery Elementary and Ashford Park Elementary would be able to get together, form a board of directors. You obviously have, under the charter school law, some responsibility for meeting some higher standards with regard to academic achievement, but you get some flexibility in how you pursue those objectives. And there is some funding that comes along with the approval of a charter school application through that is public funding. Through the normal process. So that is something that the Druid Hills cluster is currently looking at. I think it's something, frankly, that we should take a close look at as well. And it is an immediate option that is available to pursue. Now, it requires a lot of work in interfacing with the school system in order to get it done. But it is something that is presently on the table. Current law enables it to happen, and frankly, I think it's something that we ought to take a look at, particularly keeping in mind that we already in the Chamblee cluster have charter schools. So it's not a stretch to take the entire cluster into a charter cluster status. I should also mention, and this, as long as we're on the subject of education, this goes to prove, legislators often get knocked for, oh, you're always just down there protecting the special interests and you don't listen to the people. Well, let me tell you something that just happened today. It came from Erica Maimudis, who is from Ashford Park. I don't know, I didn't see Erica here, but who is from Ashford Park. She lives in Representative Holcomb's district, but she's just outside my district, and she emailed me and Representative Holcomb and said, at the time all of the lawsuit craziness was going on with the DeKalb School Board, and I will also say, before I even launch into this, let me say, I do want to give kudos to the school system for self-correcting on this issue. And that is, they've ended the school system. And I see Marshall Orson out there. Marshall, I'm giving you props for your agenda item that ended the school system's participation in the lawsuit. Sponsored by Marshall Orson, passed unanimously by the school board, discontinuing the school system's participation in a lawsuit that's been highly publicized. At the time that all of that going at a relatively frenetic pace, we were contacted, Representative Holcomb and I, by Erica Maimudis, who said, well, there ought to be a state law that just prohibits the use of public funds for lawsuits challenging this statute, other than just going through the normal process that is laid out in the statute for a board member after removal by the governor to appeal to the governor and ultimately to an administrative law judge for reinstatement. Other than that process, and that's an individual process anyway, so there would be no public funds. public funds should not be used for a multiplicity of litigation over the statute. So I responded back almost immediately, and so did Representative Holcomb. We both said that's a great idea. You know, that should be clear in the statute. So I introduced a bill that was in the press a little bit prior to crossover day, and it was unfortunately pretty close to crossover day, so it was difficult to get it passed. We did talk with, and it's a prohibition on using public funds for lawsuits challenging the school board removal statute. This came from a Brookhaven resident, and it passed today. It is on the governor's desk. The way it passed is that there was a bill dealing with the school board removal statute that had already passed the House that was over in the Senate. So I went and talked with Senator Miller, and Representative Holcomb also backed that effort. And in a bipartisan way, we ended up getting that provision added to the bill that dealt with that same code section. It came back over from the Senate today, was agreed to by the House and sent to the governor's desk, and that is House Bill 115 that particular provision is in. So if anybody ever tells you that as an individual resident you can't make a difference in the legislature, just remember that story and shoot me an email or give me a call. All right, now on to local issues. House Bill, we've got two local bills that deal with the city of Brookhaven. One is it's House Bill 642 that will pass the House for the final time tomorrow and find its way to the governor's desk. It contains three pieces with regard to the Brookhaven City Charter. One is a piece with regard to the mayor's term limit that was requested by the City Council. I want to be clear that there was a resolution of the City Council asking for this particular change, making clear that the term limit of the mayor is limited to 2 full terms as opposed to one full term and a partial term. So that's in there. It also changes the name of the city accountant to the finance director. That, as I've come to learn, is what we actually refer to the position as. And so we've changed that. And the last piece we put in there is a charter commission. It's in order to deal with potential revisions to the city charter, I think it makes a lot of sense to have a systematic way to do that. And that exists in other city charters, but not in ours, but it will after the bill passes. To every 5 years review the experience of the city government, compare it to the words on the paper that it is the city charter, and suggest revisions. Every 5 years we ought to be taking a look at that. And so there will be a charter commission that will operate every 5 years and will issue a written report after every 5-year period that will contain one member appointed by the mayor, one member appointed by the city council as a whole, and one member appointed by each member of the legislative delegation. And that's exactly the same way that it's done in the city of Dunwoody and I believe the city of Sandy Springs as well. And that'll be to take a look at the city charter and suggest possible revisions. So that's all in one bill. Then you also have a bill that enables the Perimeter Community Improvement District to contract with the city of Brookhaven for projects, and also gives the city of Brookhaven a seat on the Perimeter Community Improvement, the PCID board of directors. That received final passage today. There is a Chambly annexation bill that received final passage today that basically takes all of the territory east of this vote happened one time before, but it kind of took a tortured path to the ballot box and ultimately failed by a very narrow margin. And a group of citizens from the affected neighborhood, the Dresden East Civic Association, were very active in interfacing with legislators to get another bite at that apple. And today we have passed that. And so the area basically east of the Brookhaven city limits, north of I-85 over to the city of Doraville, all of that area will be voting in this November on whether they would like to be annexed into the city of Chamblee, and that measure is also done with the city of Chamblee's full support. And that, by and large, will end up with all of the territory north of I-85, with a little exception around Doraville, I believe, being in one city or another. There's also the last piece of legislation is an interesting proposition that came up very quickly, and I'll say this. Frankly, I have found DeKalb's form of government to be thoroughly dysfunctional, and that's an understatement. This notion that we ought to have an elected political CEO who's really in charge of the day-to-day administration of the county government is, contrary to what we see in most other large counties, where they have a county commission and then a professional county manager who's responsible to the county commission as a whole. So I'd love to see I would love to see the CEO's position done away with in its entirety, and I've been very clear on that all along. But there is a proposition that passed out of the Senate as an amendment to a bill that's now back over in the House. It's House Bill 87, that would make, as a matter of general statewide law, the CEO a nonpartisan office that will be elected in the November election. And the intent of that is to make the CEO accountable to everyone in the county, and make sure that the CEO ultimately has to converse with citizens of every political stripe all across the county. It is, I think, a worthwhile accountability mechanism for that office. And so it passed on House Bill 87 and is back over in the House for further consideration, but I do support it, and it was Senator Miller that made that happen. If it does achieve final passage, he deserves a lot of credit for getting that done. So that's pretty much the waterfront, Mr. Mayor and members of council, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
And what we'll do after Mike has, if any questions for Mike, we're going to have Senator Whaley, we're going to have Allegra Johnson, but so don't leave. There's some important things coming just after this question and answer session, if there's any questions. Anybody have any questions for Representative Jacobs?
Not even one?
There's one.
Just thanks for your involvement in the MARTA privatization efforts and implementing cost-cutting measures there, increasing the efficiency of that organization, which similar to many other organizations talk about right now, thanks.
Well, I appreciate that, and that is a proposition that, for whatever reason, my brethren in the state Senate didn't see fit to pass it through. I will tell you this, though. MARTA has a new general manager, and he appears to be sounding the right themes in terms of getting privatization done at MARTA. I mean, if you've looked at the management audit that was performed by KPMG, I mean, we're literally talking in excess of $100 million in possible savings at MARTA, and that is a lot of bus service, it's a lot of train service, it really can be transformative in terms of MARTA's budget. But MARTA's got to be committed to it, and so the KPMG audit can't just be another study that's thrown on the shelf. The new general manager at MARTA, I'm impressed with. It's only his second, third month, so, I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic. But he does seem to be sounding the right themes of being committed to following through with the excellent recommendations that are in the KPMG audit. I would have liked to have done that through House Bill 264, which is the legislation I sponsored, but the Senate, for whatever reason, has decided not to take it up this session. But I will say this. Fortunately, I do have a perch as the chair of the MARTA Oversight Committee from which to hold MARTA's feet to the fire for implementation of the KPMG recommendations, and I fully intend to do that because following through with those recommendations has the potential to be absolutely transformative of transit in the entire metro Atlanta region. If we make MARTA more efficient, we have a chance to get some buy-in from counties like Cobb and Gwinnett. I mean, that's just the bottom line.
How does the last legislative piece that you mentioned about the CEO being countywide elected heavy be any different from what we do here in the cap?
It's a partisan elected office that is ostensibly elected in one party's primary in the July election. So lower turnout election, one party's primary, CEO goes on his way, won. That's why. I mean, so ultimately you're going to have a larger turnout election and a need for the CEO to show up all across the county, talking to everyone and hearing everyone's concerns.
That doesn't change your stand to eliminate the CEO position.
Well, I think it's, the problem with the CEO position is that ultimately it breeds power struggles between the commission and the CEO. I mean, and the CEO leverages his immense power in that position to his political advantage vis-a-vis the commissioners. It's unfortunate that, sometimes you call a commissioner's office and they'll say, well, we will pass the concern along, but ultimately it's the administration that deals with that, and, hopefully they will act on it, but there's no guarantee of that. And I've heard that many times from any number of commissioners, not just our two commissioners that represent this area. So I think doing away with that friction between the CEO and the county commission is a better way of governance all the way around, to have a professional hired county manager who is accountable to each and every county commissioner. But short of being able to do that through the local DeKalb delegation, at least making the CEO accountable to the county as a whole, I think is a step in the right direction. Baby steps, that's right.
All right, well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to have two people. We have Dan Weber to talk about the charter school cluster. Don't leave, because this is important. And we're going to have Allegra Johnson to talk about 501c3 that they have formed in Dunwoody to explore, I believe, a possibility of the city school system. It's a citizens advocacy group type organization. So if Dan and Allegra can come up, what I'd like to do is have Dan give a 2-minute brief introduction, then have Allegra give a 2-minute brief introduction, then come back to you, Dan, for a full presentation, if that's okay.
Sure, that's fine. Thank you, Mayor Davis. Is this live?
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you out here. My name is Dan Weber. I live in Dunwoody. I represented the 40th Senate District for 6 years, from 2005 to 2011. First, I wanted to say to our superintendent, I think you're going to do a great job. And we need to thank him for the hard work he's doing, because he is traversing this county, going from point to point, trying to reach out to everybody in the county. And that's not easy to do in DeKalb County. It's a personal sacrifice. I wanted to speak to you tonight about an approach, an option that's available right now that some of our communities are moving towards. And that approach, which would be a charter cluster, is sort of an in-between what our superintendent is talking about and the constitutional amendment, which would allow independent school systems. And a charter cluster essentially would allow a high school and all of its feeder schools, the middle school and the elementary schools, to have a great deal of autonomy, working in a close partnership with the central office to drive change at the schoolhouse level, so that decision-making is made by parents, teachers, and other stakeholders in the community at the schoolhouse level closest to the students, because we have such diverse schools the needs vary so much from community to community, from school to school across DeKalb County. And that's an introduction. And I know Allegra is here. Where did she go?
We'll come right back to you, Senator West.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Allegra Johnson. I am the proud parent of 3 children, kindergartner, a 3rd grader, and a 7th grader, all in the DeKalb County system. I'm here to speak to you tonight about a newly formed group that's called Dunwoody Parents Concerned About Quality Education. A steering committee of 8 of us came together and decided that one of the changes that needed to be made is we needed to get communication out to the parents, we needed to get communication out to the teachers, and we needed to start communication between the schools that were right next door to each other. So we came together, and our mission is to explore options for improving public education and to educate the residents of Dunwoody on all the options that are out there. We've been charged with gathering and disseminating information for interested parents, citizens of Dunwoody, as well as the teachers of Dunwoody. At our first public forum, which we held after our very first meeting, we had 350 parents come to that meeting and tell us their wants and their needs of what they wanted for the education of their children. When prohibition against new school systems was written decades ago, the largest school system that we had was the Atlanta City school system. As you can tell, over time, large systems that become too large have a cause of dysfunction and bureaucracy that prevent the education rather than promote it. Our initiatives will not cause overnight success, but there will be progress, and the ultimate outcome for our public schools in our area will be the academic journey of excellence that our children deserve. A journey that's designed for them to succeed, not a journey for 98,000 children to succeed. Each one of them has different challenges, and all of them do not learn in the same manner. And honestly, we only get one chance. My kindergartner's only going to be a kindergartner once. We've created a website called dunwoodyparents.org, which I invite all of you to go see. It's about a month old. We also have a Facebook page. We've started our own Google group. And right now we're in the process of becoming a 501c3. Presently we have our paperwork that we are a Georgia nonprofit corporation. We have our mailing address, our bank account, and our P.O. box. And the Dunwoody City Council, just a couple of weeks ago, agreed to fund the feasibility study that's going to be needed for H.R. 486 that you heard Representative Jacobs talk about. The Dunwoody Concerned Parent Group is planning on facilitating future meetings between the school councils and the PTAs in the Dunwoody schools. We want to enhance communication of these neighboring schools. We also have started a letter of intent that is being passed through the schools to put in the possibility that we may want to become a charter cluster, because our road is long to change the Constitution, and we have to take care of our kids now. They can't wait 2 years in hopes that the Constitution will get changed. So I would just like to thank you for letting me come speak to you and let you know that it's our obligation to do what's best for our kids. And the one thing I can recommend is be aware of what's going on in your schools and be proactive instead of reactive, because that's how any positive change can be made in these schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. So Senator Weber's going to come back up. So for both the options you heard from Representative Jacobs about the city charter, about the city school system possibility legislation, and what Senator Weber's about to talk about, you're going to really need a 501c3 to be able to address either of those issues. And that's why I had Ms. Johnson here, just to give people the option of, if you need it. And if Brookhaven wants to explore the city cluster option, I'm sure Senator Weber will tell you, you're going to need a group of concerned citizens to come together and form a group like what Ms. Johnson has formed. So, Ms. Johnson, if you'll be available on the back to talk to anybody, I guess, if they have any questions for you about how to get that started, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you, Senator Weber.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Davis. I'd like to go into a little more detail what this idea is about. First, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about myself. My wife, Kay, worked for 32 years in the cab system. She started in 1976 at Shellerford Elementary. She then went to Druid Hills High School She went to Miller Grove, Salem, down in South DeKalb, and came back to Dunwoody, where she was the middle school principal for a number of years, but most of her career as a math teacher. As I said before, I was in the state senate for 6 years, during which time I chaired the education committee. 2 pieces of legislation that I authored during that time was the charter cluster law in 2005, and then the charter system law in 2007. I currently serve on the Charter Advisory Committee for the state of Georgia as Lieutenant Governor's appointee. That committee was created by the charter system law in 2007. Also, today in Georgia we have 17 school systems that are charter systems. Now, maybe a new concept you may not be familiar with, but I'm going to talk about. The first large metro system to become a charter system is Fulton County last year. 8 months ago, I proposed to the Lieutenant Governor that we start a foundation to support and promote the excellent work that our charter systems are doing in their innovative initiatives that they're undertaking. And I'm now serving as the Executive Director of the Charter System Foundation, which was formed just a month ago as a 501c3 in the state of Georgia. It's very exciting. I have a couple of charts here. These charts are actually a few years old that will illustrate some of the concepts. This chart here, I apologize if you can't see it back there. At the top, this illustrates the way education works in the United States and in Georgia and locally today. At the top, you have a top-down, one-size-fits-all, where mandates and regulations from the federal government, the state government, the local board of education, the superintendent, the central office, funnel down to the high schools, middle schools, and the elementary schools. And school councils today are really appendages that are largely ineffective in determining the direction that individual schools take. The allocation of resources, decisions about curriculum, schedule, teachers' pay, books, schedules, and so on, are all made at these levels. They are not made at the schoolhouse level or the cluster level. This is a fundamental problem in education we have in Georgia today. And I think, by extension, in our large metro counties, our superintendent's talking about decentralization, moving towards decisions being made closer to the cluster level and the individual school level. Thanks. So one of the key concepts here is decisions about how students learn and how resources should be allocated should be made at the schoolhouse level, secondarily at the cluster level. A second very important principle that I've always had great faith in DeKalb County, we have a tremendous reservoir of talent and goodwill in this county. That talent and goodwill resides with the parents and resides with our teachers and administrators in the school. We don't really leverage that talent the way we should. I'm always struck when I come to meetings like this, whether it's in Druid Hills, Stevenson, Tucker, Dunwoody, by the intelligence of the parents in the room. People who really care about the education of their children and really seem to be knowledgeable about the issues. We're really ignoring that resource in the way our school system is set up with the top-down management. Unfortunately, in the metro area in particular, we've had trust that's been broken when it comes to education. SACS is the watchdog group that manifests the concerns of the community when they put systems on probation. Clayton County went through that some years ago and actually lost their accreditation. That led to the law that allows for the governor to remove school board members in a system that is threatened with loss of accreditation. Last November, you voted at the voting box on a constitutional amendment to allow the state to approve charter schools over the objection of a local school board. I was a supporter of that amendment. In fact, I wrote the law that preceded that got struck down by the Supreme Court. I was involved in that. What's curious about that amendment is if you look at the vote, the highest percentage vote of any county in the state of Georgia was in Clayton County. Not far behind it was DeKalb County, Gwinnett County, some of the metro counties. Parents are very frustrated. They're looking for real structural change in education. I can tell you that my wife now, after retiring from the school system, teaches in private school at St. Martin's Episcopal School, right around the corner here. Private school applications last year set a record. This year they're up even more than last year. These are indicators that trust has been broken. And what can we do to restore that trust? I think we need to drive the decision-making down to the schoolhouse level. We need to tap into that resource of the parents and the teachers and the administrators and other stakeholders in the community and give them some real authority to affect the direction of their schools. And I would submit that if the school board and our superintendent has the foresight to do this, we would see a true rejuvenation, a true revitalization of schools in DeKalb County. Now, how do we do this? One way to do it is through charter system. What does it mean when we use the word charter? That means two things. It means that the state is saying to the school system, and we'll talk about Fulton County since they're the one large metro system that's doing it starting last year. What the state says is we will authorize you to have complete flexibility from state mandates. Class size, you do what you want. Teacher certification, you do what you want. Teacher pay, you do what you want. Seat time, you do what you want. On down the line. So you have complete flexibility. In exchange for that, the charter system has to agree to meet higher performance standards as part of their contract. But in the case of a charter system, the school system also has to agree to give real authority at the schoolhouse level. So you put together school level governance teams that make decisions about who's going to be the principal, budget decisions, curriculum decisions, instruction decisions. And these are teachers, these are administrators, these are parents and business people sitting on the school governance teams. We have this going on now in Georgia in 17 school systems. And they're doing some great things. Let me tell you some of the things that Fulton County has done just in the last year. 150 members of the central office staff were told you lost your job. We're decentralizing, we are restructuring. You've got to reapply for your job. In that process, they got rid of some dead weight. In that process, they found some new talent. The superintendent has said to some ineffective principals and assistant principals, you need to do something else. You need to move on. He has said, with regard to our alternative school, we've got the worst principal with the worst teachers, with the worst students. We're not doing a very good job. We're putting out a request for proposal for a private organization to come in and run it. They're doing that now also with regard to some of their other low-performing schools because they recognize they've not done a good job. And if they can have KIPP Academy or somebody come in and do a better job, they're open to that possibility. Fulton County and other charter systems are taking a serious look at and starting to implement differentiated pay for teachers. In Fulton County, there was a position advertised for a high school level AP chemistry position, 0 applications. Another position for PE, 625 applications. As their superintendent will say, I can take a Georgia Tech grad, chemistry grad, and teach them how to teach. I can't take an education grad and teach them how to do chemistry. We need to pay more to a chemistry graduate. We also need to delineate and differentiate between teachers based on their performance in the classroom. Fulton County is also training school level governance teams over the next year. The first cohort of 20 schools, how to set budgets, how to deal with curriculum, how to make real decisions at the schoolhouse level. What's really interesting in this process that Fulton County has gone through is the part of the county that was most excited about it, South Fulton, because they feel like they get the least down there. They get the least in the way of good teachers, they get the least in the way of AP courses, and so on. They want to take control. That's a charter system, which is not specifically what I was asked to speak about. Terry's done a good job of holding up.
Rebecca Chase Williams is referring to
this chart here. This illustrates how a charter cluster might operate, where you have the high school, middle school, and the elementary schools, where there would be a contract with the local board of education, flexibility in exchange for performance from the cluster. Now, under this concept, you'd have a 501c that would govern the cluster. And a key proposal is that that governing body of the cluster would be the employer of the instructional staff. The instructional staff meaning the teachers and the principals and the assistant principals. Now, those same teachers and principals would be on the governing body along with parents, along with other stakeholders, and I would propose also you put your regional area superintendent from the central office. You might even put one or more of your school board members on the governing council of the cluster. Now, you empower your school level governance teams to make decisions about the principal, about the teachers, about your curriculum, all the resource decisions and the allocations now made at that level. And each of them would send representatives to the cluster-wide governing council. Thanks, Dave. So that's what Charter Cluster is about. We currently have Druid Hills High School moving in a very organized, very enthusiastic manner in that direction. Dunwoody has submitted its letter of intent. There's a group of parents working on that. I know that there's a group working on it in Chamblee. There's a group working on it in Lakeside. 3 years ago, we traveled to Tucker High School. We traveled to Stevenson High School. There were parents very interested in doing it there. So I'm hoping that the school board and the superintendent will be open to this idea because they have to approve it for it to happen. It has to be a partnership. So when you hear about Charter Cluster, that's what Charter Cluster is about. It's the same principles as a charter system. In my opinion, the idea would be for the CAB to become a charter system and then have charter clusters within the charter system. So we would break down and truly decentralize down at the schoolhouse level. And I really believe that if the parents drive for this and if it's approved, I think it would just revitalize the CAB schools in a major way. And one of my core beliefs is, I could ask each of you to put your name in a hat. I could draw 5 names out of that hat. I would have 5 people who could run a school or a cluster better than the central office. I mean, you guys are here tonight on a Tuesday night because you care about education issues. you study the issues, you're knowledgeable. That's what this is about. So.
Any questions for Senator Weber?
I have a question.
Okay.
Senator Weber.
Yes.
Right behind you. What is the, is there a negative financial implication going to cluster from a funding source?
There is not necessarily. All of the terms of how the charter cluster would operate in the funding are subject to negotiation between the cluster itself, which would be the 501c entity, and the superintendent and the school board. So there would be an agreement as to how much funding should come to the cluster. In a simplistic way, I would say you would look at your teachers, your instructional staff that you have currently, the amount of money that's dedicated to that, and perhaps that's how much money you get. Because you're taking over the function of being the employer of that instructional staff. Now the teachers and the administrators and so on would continue to get their benefits. They would get the same health care, the same retirement on down the line. And they will also now be empowered to really take control and do the things that they wanted to do when they decided to become a teacher. I mean, and what we're finding in our charter systems like Marietta, Decatur, Calhoun, City Schools, Cartersville, Madison County, our superintendents who are pushing for that kind of change are finding that when they tell the teachers, you now have flexibility in your classroom, there's an adjustment period for the teachers. Because they've worked so many years being told on day 21 out of the school year, out of 180 days, you've got to be on page X and Y in your book, teaching 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to give you more flexibility to do what you know how to do best as a professional teacher. And once they learn that, they get very excited. But the funding is very simple level, open to negotiation. I had, 3 years ago, there was a group, we traveled around the county, we met with Ramona Tyson, several school board members, including Marshall Orson, who supports this idea. You'll notice that this chart is entitled High Needs Cluster. There's a corresponding chart that looks much the same that is entitled High Resource Cluster. Dunwoody, Lakeside, Brookhaven, Shanley would be a high resource cluster. The proposal that we put out there at that time was that a high resource cluster might give up a portion of its funding that could then be used in high needs cluster because they have higher needs. Fulton County as a charter system is actually driving in that direction, where they're recognizing that there are differentiated needs from one community to another, and the superintendent is pushing the idea that South Fulton in particular should get more money per student. North Fulton's a little bit queasy about that, and a number of parents, when this was proposed, were a little queasy about it. So that's why I don't talk about it too much. It's just a concept that I think would help unify the county. This is not about separating the county. This is about bringing people together and getting them excited. You know, we had 403 people put their name in the hat to be appointed to the school board. That's exciting. When Fulton County did their first elections just recently for the school governance teams, they had large numbers of people coming out because now people are excited that they actually will have some authority to make a difference at the schoolhouse level. So in a sense, a charter cluster would operate in large part similar to an independent school system. A lot of support and partnership would still come from the central office, but the key decisions about academic achievement, how to educate kids we made at the schoolhouse level and secondarily at the cluster level because you have a need for alignment and coordination between the schools.
This is my first time hearing this, so I'm just learning as you go, but When you say that and you're giving all that responsibility to the school clusters or school systems, wouldn't that eliminate the need of the central office positions? And I'm guessing they're not going to like that.
Would it eliminate the need for the central office positions, and would they not like that? Arguably, yes, if you take it to its logical extreme. But no, they haven't reapplied. What Fulton County did was they took their county and broke it into 4 areas. And they're putting an individual superintendent over each area. So each person in the old central office, not every person, but 150 of them had to reapply for new positions in the decentralized structure. They lost their old job, and they had to apply for a new job in one of the 4 areas, regional areas around the county.
Could you do that in DeKalb County where you have 4 districts and we manage, if we have some influence on this district, if it's district number 1? Couldn't
we do that in DeKalb?
5,000 students over here?
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I say I think, in my opinion, the ideal thing to do in DeKalb would be to become a charter system where you decentralize, and our superintendent's already moving in that direction, where he's talking about giving more authority to area superintendents. But take it further in that and create charter clusters within each area.
So we want to put out 3 clusters in a system then. Is that what you're talking about?
Each cluster, the Chamblee cluster would operate independent of the Dunwoody cluster, from the Lakeside cluster, from the Stevenson cluster, and so on. Now, arguably, some of our clusters, high needs clusters, you would think may not have the organizational abilities, may not have the community support to accomplish this, so maybe they don't become charter clusters. But I also will say to you that if you reach out to those communities in a correct way, the people will come out. And I'm talking largely about lower income neighborhoods with, single parent homes and so on, where they're very busy with other things and don't have time to put a lot of their time into the schools. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Well, they really don't have the ability to spend the time in schools with any meaningful results. Now, if you give them those objectives and the fact that they can have a say-so into that cluster, I think they will come out.
Yeah, what he's saying is he thinks they will come to this school if you give them the time. Let's talk about the Hispanic community as an example. Traditionally, what educators will say about the Hispanic community is they have respect for the school authorities, they assume the job's being done, and they think it's disrespectful to come in. I know in Dunwoody, we have Hightower Elementary, which is in Doraville, which is largely Hispanic, 100% minority. And I met their PTA once, and it was one lady. She said, I am the PTA. Contrast that, though, with Marietta school system, which is a charter system, which has pushed decision-making down to the schoolhouse level. They're getting hundreds of Hispanic parents coming to meetings because the school system's reaching out to them and saying, we want you to come, we want your input, we want to give you some authority, and they're responding to that. So, will it eliminate the central office? I don't think so. What I would like to see is some of the central office come out and participate more on a regional basis, as Fulton County has done. There is a need for that.
With the discussion for new city school districts, and that it's going to take a while to do that, with the needs of a lot of parents in here that have a child in school right now, they need to see it change. How long, and assuming that there's a similarity in the education provided by say a city of Dunwoody school system versus a city charter or a charter in that area, a charter system, assuming that they can provide similar education, how quickly could the charter system come into play? How soon could it start affecting change?
The Druid Hills community is targeting the 14-15 school year. Not 13-14, which is next year, but the year after that. And it can, theoretically, it could happen in 13-14, but that's too close. And you have to recognize there has to be a phase-in period, there has to be training of the principals and the teachers and the parents who are going to participate in the governance of the schools and the cluster. Fulton County's doing that right now. The first contingent they trained were their principals. And they've hired Highlands Consulting Group, which is a professional consulting group to train their principals, their school level governance teams, to teach them about what does it mean to construct a budget? What does it mean when you make personnel decisions and so on? And what the school boards and superintendents are finding in those situations is once you give the parents that power and the teachers that power to make those decisions at the schoolhouse level, the complaining goes way down. Because now the parents and the teachers have made a decision, so how can they complain about their own decisions? I mean, we can criticize the DeKalb School Board for the decisions they make, but they put themselves out there. If it's our decisions, then what we find in some of our smaller charter systems is the complaining stops.
But if you were to start a city school, you're still going to have the same training to organize that city. So that all seems to be on level ground. The point, I think, is I would conclude that the charter system would come into effect a lot quicker than the city system.
Well, there's charter cluster and then there's charter system. Charter system, for a school system like DeKalb to do that properly, takes about 2 years of work. Fulton County, before it became a charter system, spent 2 years traveling around the county to meetings like this to talk to the parents and the teachers and administrators to get their input and to get their buy-in to the concept. Because it's a community sort of bottoms-up approach rather than a top-down approach. And that takes a lot more work to do that.
We have time for one more, Senator Weber, one more question. Kim?
Senator Weber, Kim Birch of the Cross Keys Foundation. Thank you for all your hard work. Be sure to thank your wife for all of her years teaching and what she does today. Very complicated topic, a lot of dimensions, a lot of good questions. I confess to not having done my homework. I've been doing that for 40 years and getting by, so I'm going to try again with a question. Under a charter cluster, right, Druid Hills is working on it, there's movement in Dunwoody. Are attendance areas enshrined in the charter, or are those still managed by DeKalb County?
The charter cluster, is the attendance area enshrined in the charter, or is it up to the county? Again, that's subject to negotiation, but how I would expect it to work, similar to our conversion charter schools that we have, like Chamblee High School, may not be the best example, but Peachtree Charter Middle School in Dunwoody. The charter addresses the attendance zone lines and addresses who can attend. And charter schools remain open to outside students, assuming there's capacity. And then there's a lottery. If there's more demand than there are slots, there's a lottery where names are picked out of a hat, typically. Families that have an older sibling in that cluster get first dibs. So a younger sibling can go to that cluster. That's the way it's been constructed in the past, and that's what I would expect. And I do think it's important for charter clusters in DeKalb to remain open to outside students. Again, that's a concept of our county coming together and working together rather than separating.
Ask a quick follow-up. So to me, the key thing about attendance lines is capacity.
Yes.
And so, again, without having done the homework, my concern would be if we were enshrining even open plans, how does a county that's not a cluster system manage capacity when there are cluster charters? In essence, in practice, not accepting students at a certain point. I mean, they can't be forced to add capacity, right?
Correct.
And so my concern would be, how does the community at large plan for capacity overall? Because the county's still responsible. Does that make sense?
So let's assume there was a Chamblee charter cluster.
Right.
And let's assume that Chamblee, based on the size of the buildings and so on, has a capacity of 4,000 students total in the cluster. So those, let's say 3,800 spots are taken up by resident kids, 200 from kids coming from the outside. How does the county manage capacity if more than 200 want to come to Chamblee? Is that your question?
If there's overcrowding in non-cluster, non-chartered clusters, how does the county manage? Let me cut to the chase.
Yes.
I think one of the biggest failures in our county is managing capacity planning.
Yes.
We have too much plant in the wrong places.
Yes.
So when we create charter clusters, it seems to me there's a risk of making that problem worse countywide. Capacity is going to be in the wrong places.
Why does creating a charter cluster make capacity planning worse?
So it's hypothetical, don't know, but it seems to me that if we're controlling the attendance line planning to harmonize practically with the charter and the direction of the charter clusters, then that is one less piece of the puzzle that the county's going to have to manage adding capacity, for example, at Chamblee or at Cross Keys or at Lakeside. Right now they add capacity, in 7-10-year cycles.
So are you thinking that if Chamblee has capacity of 4,000 students and it's a charter cluster and other clusters that are not charter clusters have extra students, that they ought to be able to send those students to Chamblee? And Chamblee might have to go 10% or 15% over capacity?
Well, or the reverse, to me, is really kind of the interesting part of this, because if the taxpayers, we're all going to be funding all of these schools, we're funding schools that are under-enrolled, and a school is at or over capacity, then the logical thing to do in most systems is to rebalance using attendance lines. We resist that here for all sorts of reasons we don't want to get into. It's not productive in this meeting. But if we do continue to have under-enrolled schools, we're paying for that space. It's really the reverse is what I'm saying, Senator. If there is an empty school 1 mile away and an overcapacity school, but it's a charter cluster, the parents and the community are going to feel a sense of obligation, entitlement to not be taken out of that cluster naturally. So to me, it kind of binds the decision-making about capacity planning. But I think it's something we have to look at more closely.
My personal opinion is that if Chamblee has a capacity of 4,000 students, because the community gets excited about a new model that allows them to take control of their schools, and as a result of that, they have 4,500 or 5,000 students that want to attend Chamblee schools, I'm not going to tell those parents that they have to go to another school outside of Chamblee.
That's exactly what
to go to an undercapacity school because of capacity concerns.
Right.
I personally think it's exciting that the Chamblee community would really get behind its schools and they would find a way to make it work.
I agree with you completely.
That's the way I look at it.
I agree with you completely. I think it's an economic question about the subsidy. There's like an implied subsidy of that excess capacity. But that's academic.
Yeah, I will say that defining what capacity is has been an ongoing debate in DeKalb for years. What is the capacity of Chamblee High School, for example, or Dunwoody High School? That's a variable that's been going up and down over the years, depending on what formula you use to determine it.
Thank you, Senator Weber. We've got custodians that have to get this place shut down, and we've got some employees that need to get some chairs up too.
Well, thank you for all the time, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.